You pompous, stuck-up, English, snot-nosed, giant, twerp, scumbag, fuckface, dickhead, asshole.
True Vulgarian.
I did mess that up.
It's all right.
It's not in the right order.
That's good. That's really good.
Hi, you've reached the Signal Watch. Movies, television, comics, and more. I'm your host, Ryan Steens. Join me and our cadre of co-contributors as we examine cultural artifacts of the 20th century, boldly explore the 21st, and try to put it all in perspective. Stay tuned. We're gonna try to make this work. So, hey everybody, welcome back to the Signal Watch. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Steens, and with me today is...
Jamie Steens.
And...
Simon Day. Hello.
And what are we talking about today, y'all?
A Fish Called Wanda, made in 1988, directed by Charles Crichton, and starring John Cleese, Michael Palin, Jamie Lee Curtis, and Kevin Kline.
So, I didn't see this one in the theater. This is one that pretty much as soon as it hit VHS... my brother, I think, rented it and immediately became one of those things we quoted all the time. Not as much as I think as Jamie, but I do remember him driving around. Because right about the time he got a driver's license, and he'd be driving around in his car, driving like a 16-year-old, and you get like asshole as we were.
Was he driving on the wrong side of the road and shooting at people as well?
He was driving on the wrong side of the road for sure.
I realised watching this last night that I still quote it now, which I kind of guess I've forgotten where the quotes come from. But I definitely still say that person's like Rambo without a jockstrap if somebody's like upset. And if I get upset, I still kind of like go, disappointed.
You jump in the air and kick the car.
So it's amazing how much of it's stuck, actually, I think. But the reason I wanted to do this was I think we were talking one time, and Jamie said, you said you'd watched a lot when you were young.
Yeah. In fact, when we were watching it on Wednesday night or Thursday night, I started taking notes. I wrote literally 2 notes, and I said, I have this movie memorized. Why am I doing this? So I stopped and just watched it. But yeah, so... I feel like I might have a bit of a Space Jam fallacy thing going on with this movie, but I genuinely think it is one of the best movies ever made. Like I know I saw it when I was a kid. I know I watched it over and over and just, love it from a kid angle, but it's like lightning in a bottle.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Everything just clicks with this movie. Like the story, the script, the actors, like the chemistry between the actors, just everything is gold.
Yeah.
And it's still, I think it still holds up.
I mean, especially when you think they tried to make a sequel with Fierce Creatures.
It wasn't really a sequel. They just wanted to get together with the 4 of them and do a new movie.
Yeah.
And we went and saw it. We were really excited about it, and we went and saw it in the theater, and it was not great.
No.
I won't say it's a bad movie. It's just forgettable.
Yeah. It is different kind of humor. It's more whimsical, I guess, and more gentle. But it's just, I think you're totally right in the fact that they just couldn't recapture the energy as well of kind of Wanda. Because I was the same as you. So this was the first video I ever owned. I bought this in Ghostbusters, and those were the first films I ever owned before I taped anything off TV. And And of course, so for a couple of months, those were the only films I watched over and over, like alternated. So I was the same. You know, I probably watched this God knows how many times in 1990.
I'm pretty sure at one point I watched this movie and then rewound it and watched it again.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's more than me. I didn't do that. But this kind of got me into Python. I mean, I'd already seen the Python TV show, but this kind of made me go and buy Life of Brian and the Holy Grail and kind of, you know.
My brother had introduced me to Python a few years earlier, so I was familiar with John Cleese and Michael Palin.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I found it interesting that I kind of feel like you would expect this to be more Python-esque, but I really feel like there's only two instances where I was like, yeah, that's something that's really Python. One was the briefcase left on top of the car. was a real Python moment. And then the other thing I think is the whole bit with the dogs.
Yeah. I say maybe the trips up the nose as well, actually.
I was actually going to say the bit where John Cleese is with Michael Palin trying to get him to say the name of the airport.
Well, sure, because that's the only scene that they have together.
Right. But that was the one that felt to me like the most, like I can see that being in a sketch or being the sketch.
Yeah, I think if they had more scenes together, it would have felt more like a Monty Python bit. But
it's actually it's kind of more like Fawlty Towers, because they had a Fawlty Towers episode called Waldorf Salad, where these Americans visited, this American couple. And of course, John Cleese is like, you know, kind of being rude to them as usual, and his wife's kind of being nice. And they're kind of telling his wife stuff. So he's kind of busy in the kitchen, and he sent the chef home early that night because he's trying to save money. So he's basically, they asked for a Waldorf salad. And the whole joke of the whole episode is he doesn't know how to make it. So he's like, have you ever tried a Ritz salad? They're like, what's that? He goes, oh, it's celery and, sour cream. And they're like, no, don't think we ever will. And he's like, so just remind me again, what's in a Waldorf salad? And just goes on and on. And I was like, this is kind of similar to that. Because last night watching it, and I kind of must have known this before, but I was like, this is such a farce, like a real English farce where, you know, people are kind of like, there's a lot of coincidences and there's a lot of quick, here comes my wife, hide in the cupboard. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of like people hearing half of a conversation but missing the important information. And just the fact that John Cleese and Jamie Lee Curtis, I think they have 3 scenes together where they're trying to have sex and it keeps going wrong. Like Kevin Kline keeps turning up. But it doesn't get boring, even though it's basically doing the same joke over and over, you know?
Yeah, well, the same thing with the dogs.
Yeah, totally.
I mean,
totally.
To me, it keeps getting funnier because they keep singing the same song at the funeral. They keep having dog funerals.
Yeah. And I love Michael Palin with his black armband, you know.
Well, that's the thing about this movie, too, is that the characters are so lovely and so fleshed out. And there's such a sweetness to his character. I mean, even though, like, the 4 main characters are kind of scumbags because they're robbing a bank and, you know, trying to get away with it. But they're still lovable.
Well, they're also very different. And, you know, I guess, like, Palin and Kevin Kline, you know, have the biggest kind of like, you know, standout things to do, like Kevin Kline verbally and I guess Michael Palin physically, but all of them, even the guy who plays George, like the lead of the robbers, you know, he's got a great couple of bits where he's like, I think Michael Palin tells him he's managed to get the key or whatever, and he goes, fan-fucking-tastic, and he has like his little scene where he jumps.
Yeah, even the bit players like George and the wife.
The wife, yeah.
He is fantastic.
Yeah.
She is hilarious in this movie and just note perfect.
So do you know her from other things? Because I really don't.
The actress, I'm pretty sure she's. I mean, I'd definitely say she's been in TV stuff in England. There's a lot of people who've been in TV stuff in this, like John Cleese's kind of helper, who you see briefly, who seems to know the head villain because they kind of whisper to each other.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But he's been in lots of TV stuff as well. So, and you know what surprised me last night was I was expecting this to be like like a couple of years ago when we saw Love Actually, I think I said to you, wow, it looks cheap to me. It looks like a TV kind of, movie rather than a film. And I was kind of expecting the same, but actually it kind of looked okay, I thought, when I watched it last night.
It looks good. The only thing
it looks like a mid-budget comedy.
Yeah, the only thing to me that really stood out as being 80s was the music.
Yeah.
It has a very 80s, and Ryan even said, I said, this is like a very 80s soundtrack. He's like, it's a very adult contemporary 80s soundtrack.
I would say Jamie Lee Curtis's dresses as well, which were
in fact, there were a couple of them that I thought looked straight out of Laura Ashley. In fact, I honestly really adore a number of her outfits in this movie. But, the one where she shows up in the courtroom just looks like it's eating her. It's just enormous, like the shoulder pads and stuff. But
it's like she's wearing a floral tent in a couple of scenes. And I'm basically like, her normal clothes are worse than the disguise she wears when she's disguising.
I don't mean to take over this.
No, it's fine.
I just love this movie so much.
Yeah,
so you talked about the Pythons a little bit, but to me, Jamie Lee Curtis and Kevin Kline in this movie, these are my two favorite roles, both of them.
For
both actors. Like, if anything they've done.
Wow.
And I know they've been in some good stuff, but I feel like this is the highlight of both of their careers.
Mm.
And I'm honestly shocked that, and I know Jamie Lee Curtis was still in stuff after this, but Kevin Kline was in a couple of things after this, like Dave. But then after that, he kind of went away.
He kind of became a leading comedy man, but then I think he aged out a little bit by the end of the 90s, kind of.
I don't know what happened exactly, but I mean, I had thought this movie actually made Kevin Kline. I don't remember him before.
I think it did.
So you had this, and then
But I expected it for his trajectory, especially after he won the Oscar.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
He was for this.
Oh, he did.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, before this, he was in Big Chill and stuff, and Silverado.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So I have to walk that back. But yeah. I mean, this is where I first saw him.
Yeah.
In anything, and then it was like, oh, it's a Kevin Kline movie. I'll go see it. And we saw some garbage that he was in.
Yeah, I mean, he's so brilliant in this, and I guess I attribute a lot of that to the script, but a lot of it he improvised.
Yeah,
It's funny because it's a role that I just thought he was a weirdo when I saw it when I was a kid. And now, as like an adult, I'm like, oh, I totally understand who this character is. Like, I know this guy. Like, this guy lives online on Twitter.
He's a guy who thinks he's smart and totally isn't, and then gets really defensive when you call him on it.
Yeah.
And the Trump's quarter now.
I'm into philosophy. He's like a ninth grader who's trying to discover things with like, it's Nietzsche, and it's like, yeah, we all heard about Nietzsche.
The scene where Wanda calls him out on that is just brilliant. Yeah. He's like, no, you're wrong on all of these things that you thought were true.
Well, I thought also like Kevin Kline with this, it's a perfect fit for him. And I like him as an actor, but I think he has a tendency to kind of try to do this in other films, and it doesn't fit the film, or it's not as good. But this is kind of perfect. Like he did a film around the same time as this called The January Man, which is like a thriller.
I saw it, but I don't remember it at all.
He's almost like a kind of modern day Sherlock Holmes who's brought in by the police department to catch the killer.
Right. Yeah.
Alan Rickman's like his helper, his kind of Dr. Watson.
Remember
that. And he's really quirky, and he's, trying to romance his brother's wife. And watching it, you're like, he's borderline annoying through this whole film. Whereas I feel like Fish Called Wanda, he's supposed to be annoying, so that's why it works, He's like a total idiot who thinks he's, quite clever.
but that's why the layers in these characters are so brilliant, because he is a dumbo, but then he has certain things that he's brilliant at, like the
murder.
Yeah, like he's really talented, and what he's got to do in the robbery, and and shooting people, and he's
yeah. I think he went on to go do Broadway instead of because I know he and Phoebe Cates live in New York, and she has like her galleries or whatever she owns up there now. She quit acting decades ago, but I think he was still doing stuff, but I think the work just the 90s era comedies just weren't good. Yeah. And I think Wild Wild West just kind of drove the last nail into all of it. He pops up in still some things. I'd love to know how much he got paid for doing Beauty and the Beast. And in no way probably guessing it would be $1 billion movie. Because I'd love to know how much that lined his pockets. But he's still around and still pops up in things, but
he does a voice on Bob's Burgers.
Yeah.
So maybe that's
but I mean he's been on Broadway mostly, I think, is what he did. And
it's also the same as John Cleese and Michael Palin, really, because this was kind of the end of their run from the mid-70s, because this was definitely the last big film they were in. And they, Michael Palin kind of went off and did his travel documentaries for the rest of the 90s, really. But,
right, yeah.
And then John Cleese, kind of was Q in a couple of Bond films, but really, you kind of get the feeling this is the last time they could get a studio to give them money to kind of do just what they wanted. After this, they kind of became just kind of actors for hire more, I guess. And aged out as well, again.
Yeah, I mean, I think they were both around 50 when they did this movie. Yeah. Which, it's another one of these, and that's part of the story is, he is married with a kid, and then this young lady comes along that, catches his eye. But, she's like probably 29 or 30 when this was filmed.
Yeah. I think he's late 40s and she's probably early 30s, I think. It's like,
it's funny because I think Jamie Lee Curtis is really good in this. I would not take that. I would never say a cross word against Jamie Lee Curtis, but I can't point to anything specific she does other than that she's just rock solid. Like it's not like she's doing a quirky character. She's doing a very smart. She's the strategist, right? She's got the wheels going behind the wheels. It's a classic heist where the people have their own agendas going on.
Well, she's playing roles as well. Like when she's like pretends to be the law student, and she's like, you won't see me, and she starts crying, and then she's like,
that is what I love about her character is that how well written it is, and that she is literally the smartest person. In this whole.
Because she's sleeping with 3-4 the guys basically at the same time.
Yeah, and she literally kisses everyone in this movie, but she's doing it for a reason.
Yeah.
To try to get something.
Yeah. Well, it's a bit like they brought out that remake of Dirty Rotten Scoundrels like a couple of years ago that bombed, and they were like, "Hey, well, we've changed it up, so this time they're women," and it's like, well, that's missing the whole point of the original Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, which is they got duped by a woman at the end of it, and it's kind of the same with this. It's like they did have powerful women in the original films, you just didn't watch them. They thought they were putting a fast one, but they weren't. They're being used, actually.
Yeah. It's a very good point. I have not seen the remake, and
I watched it on an airplane. It is not good. Well, they tried to copy the original, beat for beat, and it's like if you're gonna flip the script on it, like switch it up so that it works for women.
Yeah,
like they could have written it that way, and they didn't.
Was she Ruprecht? Mother? No, not mother.
But yeah, I think Jamie Lee Curtis is great in this, and the even bits like her ridiculous disguise and all of that work really well.
I love also that's so stupid because like her, Michael Palin, and Kevin Kline are all in the court at the same time.
She's the only one that's in disguise.
I'm like, are they supposed to not realize the other ones are there, or are they just ignoring her because they know she's got bad disguise on?
I just felt like maybe she was trying to disguise herself from Archie.
Yeah,
because she's the only one that he knew what she looked like.
That's true. Yeah,
so maybe that was it. I don't know.
Because that's before he meets Otto, I think, isn't it? Yeah,
it is. Yeah.
I do love when Otto is like trying to apologise to him as well. I'm so sorry I keep hitting you. So stupid. And that's all. And the jewel, John Cleese, managing to get a jewel in his mouth. That's very cool. There's so many great.
I even said to Ryan, like, I have no idea how he did that.
Yeah,
choking.
Yeah,
and that piece of jewelry just cracks me up because she happens to have this giant locket that's empty, that is big enough for that key.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not enough of a big deal to ruin the movie, but it's just something that if you've seen it 800 times, you kind of laugh at.
Well, I think as it goes on, it kind of does the Jaws thing where by the end, with him getting stuck in the concrete, they've got such a momentum going that you kind of let them get away with stuff like that.
Oh, sure.
Because you're just kind of like, yeah, that wouldn't happen, but at this point, who cares? It's funny.
Yeah. The other goose that makes me laugh, and I noticed when I was a kid, is the whole sex scene between Kevin Kline and Jamie Lee Curtis, where he is speaking Italian that's half Italian foods because he doesn't really doesn't know Italian. And you could literally, like, when he's bouncing up and down, you can see air between the two of them.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that just cracks me up. And I did read that, like, she was laughing so hard when they filmed that she had to bury her face in a pillow. But that whole scene is just brilliantly edited between the two of them, and then going back to Archie Leach and his wife when they're in their separate beds, getting ready for bed, and
No, I totally agree with you, Jamie. I think that's, the cross-cutting to him, like, cutting his toenails and stuff.
I think he was cutting corns off the side of his foot, which is just, like, one of the grossest things you can possibly do.
Is that smelling his soap?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just, it holds up. And it definitely still made me laugh. Yeah, I mean, it just works so well. There's so many. I think Kevin Kline, especially, his conversations are just so funny. I mean, even I think the first thing he says when he meets Ken is like, the first time you see him, is he like, I had a friend in the CIA who had a stutter. It killed him, damn it. It's just so stupid,
Yeah, I have to, give kudos to Michael Palin for that performance because that can't be easy to do. He said that his dad actually had a stutter.
Yeah.
When he was growing up, so he's familiar with someone that had it. But it's a really good performance.
Yeah, and I think they also kind of tread a very fine line because when it came out, especially in England, and I'm sure there was some in America, where they got a bit of criticism because of that. Mm-hmm. And I think, Michael Palin said, well, my dad had a stutter, so I'm not laughing at those people. I'm just saying that under times of stress, it kind of gets worse.
Yeah. And you can see that in the movie, when depending on who he is talking to, and even the one time that he's able to speak freely with Kevin Kline is when he wins the bet.
Yeah.
He calls him over. He finally has a little bit of confidence, and he is fine until he spills the beans. Or
Jamie Lee Curtis kisses him, and he just goes, yeah, so anyway, the key's over there.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, if you were to try and brave a remake on this, there is no way they would do this now. And I don't know if that's good or bad. I understand why it would be considered to be offensive, but
there's that joke in A Life of Brian, the end of Life of Brian as well, where I think it's Terry Gilliam is basically like him and Eric Idle are like the kind of guard helpers to Michael Palin's very nice centurion. And, Michael Palin's going, crucifixion or freedom. And then, of course, Terry Gilliam's going like, he's my he's my And then he's trying to say he's mad, sir. And then after, like, they all go, he's going, anyway, so what were you saying? Well, the other night. So he's just, like, pretending to have a stutter. So it's like a kind of old joke, but...
It's also interesting just that, like, some of the things we grew up with that were part of humanity for so long, like speech therapy is come a long way. I don't even know if people would even recognize a stammer like that at this point. Like, I haven't come across someone. There was a guy I went to high school with who had a stammer. And in high school, it was one of those things where we all knew when you talked to this guy, you went on pause and you let him take however long he was going to take. Yeah. I ran into him 3 years out of high school. I don't know what had changed. That dude's stammer was completely gone. So even for like an older person or an adult, they've kind of worked it out. I haven't run across someone with a stammer in decades at this point.
That's true.
It reminds me of kind of like, you see like teen acne commercials. They have so many like chemicals now. Like, you don't see kids with acne anymore.
Yeah, you really don't.
Or
no many.
Like horrible teeth. Like, you just don't, like, all the things that, like, when you watch older movies or you think about your own youth, like all this stuff, it's like, wow, we live kind of in an age of wonders. Like, they fixed stammers. Who would have thought that was going to happen?
Well, it didn't bother me watching this. The only two things that stood out to me was they used the F word as usual, and when I say that, I mean, like, slur for gay man.
Oh, right.
I'm like, it's an 80s film. You've got to say that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, there was definitely that bit of homophobia and the.
Yeah, because even Michael Palin, I think, said, "Well, it's better than being buggered." Ran away from Kevin Kline. And then I wasn't sure if Michael Palin was blacked up at one point. He was definitely.
I checked. He's not.
No, you can tell when he gets out of the car that he's not. But I think it's when he's in the car, just because of the way his wig is and the shadow. Like,
Rastafarian, isn't he?
Yeah.
Like Rastafarian.
On Thursday night, I was like, oh no,
Yeah, they kind of
got out of the car. It was fine. He did.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I think they got away with it, but but he was dressed as a Rastafarian. Like, you can have white Rastafarians. But apart from that, I wasn't really bothered by anything. I mean, you could tell it was a bit more kind of like bristly than what we're used to these days. I mean, and again, the 20-year-old might be horribly offended, but they probably would anyway.
The dogs thing now wouldn't. I don't know how that would go over.
Well, I know that. I don't know if they actually shot it or if they were just talking about it, but I know the dogs were supposed to be. It was like supposed to be grisly. Like, they're supposed to be like entrails and stuff. And they decided that was not going to play well, and so they replaced it with a very fake-looking dog, and that actually made it funnier.
Yeah, I'm saying that was actually really funny. It was this cartoon flattened dog.
Yeah, and when like the Doberman snatches the little dog, you can it's so clearly a stuffed animal. It's just hilarious.
I love Michael Palin in the van where he can barely control the Doberman and it's like biting him and stuff. He's like, ooh, smell this. No, it's great. It's great. I'm trying to think what else we can say, really. I mean, apart from just quoting lines.
Well, I will say that this is the first time I ever heard the word barrister. And it took me until the second viewing to realize, that's the English term for a lawyer. Even though she says it in the movie, I didn't catch it.
Well, I guess we should talk about the kind of English-American contrast, because they do a lot of jokes, especially Kevin Kline, with his
driving on the wrong side of the road thing.
Yeah, he still managed to find his gigantic American car to drive around London.
Fish and chips.
Yeah.
This is the British, this is the British, kind of thing towards world cuisine. So it has lots of pot shots on both sides, which I'm not surprised because John Cleese was married to, I think, 3 American women over the years. So I'm sure he spent a lot of time here and laughed at the differences. But I love that when they, I think when Archie's in the barrel at the end, and he goes like, yes, we're winners. He goes, winners like Vietnam. He goes, shut up.
Well, and then he did his John Wayne impression is just so funny then. Because you never hear him do that. It's always very proper John Cleese. We whipped your hat real good.
Yeah. It's I mean, like I say, it's very much. It's kind of part of that kind of like breed of films from the 80s. That I guess the big one was Crocodile Dundee of culture clashes.
Mm-hmm.
you know, they're still kind of going now, really, with stuff like, you know, the villain from Deadpool. You know, there's lots of jokes about him being British and, you know, Get Him to the Greek and films like that. But yeah, and even Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, I guess the difference between Michael Caine and Steve Martin in that. But yeah, I mean, at the time, you know, I think it was, I mean, I don't know, maybe we're just with the internet, we're more well-traveled now. But I think we still kind of joke about that a little bit, but maybe we're more sensitive about offending people now as well, you know?
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
Well, can we think of anything else?
I don't know. I was trying to think of.
No, I mean, it is hard when a movie is pretty solid. I mean,
there's nothing to complain about is the problem.
But, I mean, it does operate as there's kind of two kinds of heist movies, right? You have heist movies where they're planning the heist and then it's them pulling it off at the end, like Ocean's 11, right? Yeah. And then you have heist movies, and this comes kind of out of heist written fiction as well. I'm thinking
this is more like a double cross, isn't it? This is more like everybody double crossing each other.
Yeah, and so there's also then the how does it all go wrong, because you're talking about a bunch of crooks that are, you know, they're crooks, right? So of course, you know, you don't have any. You're pulled together for a job, so you have to keep an eye on each other, and of course things are going to go wrong. And you know, there's a lot of novels and there's a whole series of books. I think they're the Dortmunder books that really kind of play in this world. And it's anyway. I mean, they've done, you know, plenty of other movies like that kind of play in this world. But I think it's really the culture clash and the setting in London, which was very unique for, I think, American audiences when this came out. I think it also plays up, you know, I made the joke about the adult contemporary soundtrack, but it was kind of aiming at, I think the whole movie kind of aims at, you know, these aren't down in the dirt criminals, right? These are, all of them feel kind of weirdly upper middle class or upper class.
Well, it's actually kind of almost like a precursor to Bridget Jones and Notting Hill and Love Actually and all the stuff that would kind of explode almost a decade later as, like, you know, basically anything with Hugh Grant in, like 10 years later. You know, but this is, you know, definitely deserves points for, like, yeah, trying to do something different. It's not just a romantic comedy. It's also, like you say, you know, kind of like a robbery movie and, you know, not really a thriller, but it's got other stuff going on.
It's got enough of a plot to keep you otherwise engaged as to how is this going to work out beyond. I mean, at the beginning of the movie, there's no, like, you do kind of have a meet cute, I guess, between Jamie Lee Curtis and John Cleese, but it's not really. It's not a, like, oh, they stumble into each other while they're both fly fishing or whatever stupid setup you'd have in just a straight romantic comedy. Yeah. And so I think it is having, you know, we talked at some point when we were doing the What is Love podcast about, you know, I prefer romance, and Jamie, I think, said the same thing, or we prefer romance in
the context of something else. Yeah, with the greater story going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And even this movie just barely, I think, squeaks by with me believing that they love each other, because they really don't have much interaction.
Well, he kind of falls for her. I think I could see her still kind of pretending a bit at the end.
Yeah, me too.
But she hasn't really got an option, you know?
Right, exactly. This is her. Yeah, even to the point where she makes it onto the airplane. Like, she's not intending to go with him. I mean, she's kind of staring wistfully out the window, but
she would have been fine.
Yeah,
without
she would have been fine. She had the diamonds. She was good. That was her goal to be, you know, she wasn't taking any of these guys with her.
Which it did miss the classic heist thing of, it's no good to have diamonds unless you have someone to move them. So having diamonds and going to Rio does you no good.
They needed Adam Sandler. They needed Adam Sandler.
I actually haven't seen it yet. But yeah, I mean, that's always the heist thing, is always talking about, well, it's 100 million in diamonds, but we're only going to get 30 million out of it by the time we're, you know, because you have to, one, sell them illegally, and two, you know, we have to give a portion to the middleman, and, you know, all that stuff. So
it's also the actual heist, I felt, was a bit like the Pink Panther films, although they probably did it better, where I was like, this is kind of a rubbish heist. I'm sure they could have done this a lot more subtly than just going on and shooting everything with their guns. You know, I was like, this isn't very well thought out. You know, the escape was
that was actually Kevin Kline that shot that crossbow.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, I think it was like his second shot or something that he landed it. It was crazy.
I was like, why has he got that tiny crossbow? Just so he can do the
I think there's a button inside the cage
Yeah.
that's assuming if you're inside the cage, you're allowed to open it.
Okay.
And so he shoots the little plunger to hit the button. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you're designing your safes, you need to put that button off to the side, not directly in front of the door.
I mean, I agree with you about the music and the fact that it's very 80s, but I kind of like the fact that you've got the kind of romantic Fish Called Wanda theme, but you also got the kind of action music for the robbery and later on when they're kind of trying to catch up to the airport.
I think it's very memorable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so I can talk a little bit about, so the director of this was Charles Crichton, who hadn't actually made a film for 20 years before he did this. And he did a lot of the old Ealing comedies from the 1950s, like real classic stuff starring Alec Guinness back in the day. And he'd been writing the script with John Cleese since 1983. I think they'd met 3 times a month just to kind of write a little bit. But because he was 78, they wouldn't insure him. So John Cleese had to sign on as co-director. But John Cleese had a T-shirt made for Charles Crichton to wear, and I think we should all get one of these, which had on the front, "Age and treachery will always overcome youth and skill."
Nice.
So that's quite cool. So it's kind of cool that he went out. This was obviously his last film, and he went out on a big high after 20 years of not working. So that was kind of good. Well, I think he did TV stuff, but he didn't do any films. So, yeah.
Well, he did a phenomenal job.
Yeah, and this actually, and like you said earlier, you know, I mean, Kevin Kline got the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor at the Oscars. I think Cleese and Palin won Best Actor and Best Supporting Actor at the British Oscars. I think Jamie Lee Curtis was nominated for a bunch of stuff. Mm-hmm. This actually was the #1 British film of the year. And even more impressively, I think, it was the #1 rental video in the United States in 1989.
It had a slow build. I think it was released in early summer, but then it didn't make it to #1 till September, which makes sense because, by September there's not much coming out, but the fact that it had, just word of mouth and that it was such a good movie, that it had such staying power.
And that's back in the days when you could do that, where a film could just hang around and kind of build. Mm-hmm. Whereas now, if it wasn't making enough money, they'd just take it out after a couple of weeks.
The sheer number of things that are coming out now. I mean, not at this moment, nothing's coming out right now, but usually in a given year, there are a lot more movies coming out than were back then.
If something doesn't have a big opening weekend, it's got 2 weeks and gone now.
Yeah.
I remember seeing Jurassic Park in June, I think, and then I actually went away to college and saw it again just before it finished in October. And I'm like, there's no way any film would do that now. Even Avengers Endgame.
I was really sick that summer, and so I wasn't able to see it until end of
Jurassic Park summer.
Jurassic Park summer, sorry. Until the end of August, and it was still out, and there were still lots of people in the theater, probably seeing it, for the 3rd or 4th time for them.
Yeah, no, totally. Whereas even Endgame, I think they pulled after a month. They did bring it back, but they kind of still pulled it. So its budget was $8 million, and it made $177.9 million. So,
oh, wow!
My God.
Yeah, so massive hit. Sadly, the sequel obviously didn't live up to that. But interestingly, so in the novelization of Fierce Creatures, there's a letter from Archie to his brother, Rollo, who I guess is supposed to be a twin brother, just saying, I'm still happily married to Wanda. And Otto visited Ken at the water park where Ken's, feeding the dolphins. And Ken had him removed by security before he could get to him. So there's a little postscript, which was quite sweet. But yeah, I think it still holds up. It still works. For me, it's always good seeing when there's when there's more than one pie for them, there's some of my favorite films, like Brazil or Baron Munchausen or Time Bandits, and I kind of put this together with those. I always think that works really well, even though, like you said, weirdly, Palin and Cleese only had that one scene, but it is a great scene, where he's like, sing it, try singing it. Oh, come on. Sorry. So good.
The Kevin Kline scene with him at the end, it's almost, it verges on being hard to watch for me. Just because there's cruelty to him, but then also him eating.
What do you mean?
Sorry, the Michael Palin Kevin Kline scene, the torture scene.
The fish.
Okay.
With the fish.
Because the last scene with them is the steamroll.
Yeah. Sorry, guys.
That's true. Yeah.
Getting ahead of myself. Yeah, it verges on being hard to watch. But
well, actually, I guess like what Ryan said, I guess the last one is almost the reverse of that, where he's like, let's be friends. He's like, revenge.
No, that's what makes that scene so. It's so. I don't want to say a relief. It's what's the word I'm looking for?
I don't know.
Release. It's like venting.
Well, it's a rewarding scene.
Rewarding, yes.
Yeah. And it's probably, it might not be the first time, because I think Naked Gun did that gag, and then later on Austin Powers did it. But the fact that, Death by Steamroller, where it's moving so slow, it's going to take 20 minutes to get to you, it's still funny, I think.
It's still funny. And I think he was supposed to actually die, but then test audiences didn't like that very much, so then they stuck him.
Yeah,
hanging
that
on.
does kind of feel tagged on, actually.
I think it was for American audiences too, which makes sense. American audiences are more sensitive to that sort of thing.
Yeah.
If the movie doesn't work a certain way, test audiences freak out.
But I did love the very last asshole. It was a great way to end the movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it's kind of hard to really come up with anything negative, which is what we usually spend all our time talking about. But it's like, it's just really well done. I mean, I think it's funny because really it's just a bunch of scenes. And actually, so in 2008, John Cleese's daughter, who actually plays his daughter in the film, she's Portia.
Oh,
that's his real daughter. She's been trying to turn this into like a stage production. And I was thinking, you could quite easily do that, because this is basically just in a bunch of rooms, most of this.
I think that would work.
You could have Archie's office, and then you could have his house at home, the room at home, and then you could have like Wanda's flat or whatever.
I mean, you really don't have to see the robbery scene if you want to cut back on, sets.
Yeah. It's kind of like what we said ages ago. Yeah. I mean, it's like what we said ages ago about, I think when we watched The Fly, I think this would actually adapt pretty well to the stage, because it is such a farce. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it is just people climbing into cupboards and hiding and stuff. I love that scene where he kind of comes up with the champagne and he goes, ta-da! And then his wife turns around and he's like, and you can just see him looking around like, what the hell's going on? So,
yeah, that scene is very slapstick because, I mean, there's no way, just the way that it's staged, that people wouldn't be able to see the other people that are in that scene. But just because you as an audience member need to see, what's going on, they need certain locations. So.
I mean, it's such a great moment of kind of classic stage farce brought to the screen. It's great. I mean, just. Yeah, I can totally see that getting turned into a stage play. I think that would be great, and I think you're right. You need maybe four. You could do it on one of those rotating Lazy Susan stages, like 4 sets. It'd be fun.
Yeah.
But I was just thinking of that scene, and then Otto and Wendy's confrontation is so great, and she is so great in that because she's calling on him on his bullshit.
Oh, yeah.
Well, my father was a KGB agent. He's like, uh-oh.
Yeah, you only do that if you're a total idiot. Tell everybody in the neighborhood about a KGB detective.
Thank you for popping in and protecting us.
that sets him off on his like really superior snotty nose thing again. Yeah, it's just so good. I mean, I haven't seen it for a few years. I remember Alamo Drafthouse when I first worked there had a night that sadly I was working that night. Otherwise, I would have gone. But it wasn't very well attended. But I remember they showed it, and they made a special cocktail, which was funny because I think they were trying to use up all the crap they couldn't sell. So they had this blue colour with what are they called? Swedish fish. Like in there. And I was like, that looks cool, but I don't want to drink it. I bet it tastes absolutely disgusting.
Yeah, you'd be drunk and high on sugar. Like, that sounds awful.
That is brilliant because the fish that Kevin Kline was eating at the end are made of Jell-O.
Oh.
He did offer to eat the real fish, and then they said, no, you can't do that. We're not, PETA would be all over this.
Yeah, PETA they'd been around for a little bit at that point, hitting movie sets. So yeah, I can see that everyone would have already been pretty sensitive to that.
That was part of, I think, what grossed me out as a kid, was I really thought he was eating live fish.
Yeah, because it does look really realistic.
It looks really realistic, but then because they're made of Jell-O, it makes them wiggle a little bit, so that helps. Yeah. And I'm sure, he was doing something with his hand too.
Well, you can see a little fish net. His hand below it, wiggling the fish. But yeah.
He wasn't allowed to go full Nicolas Cage. Yeah. Well, apparently, I read Michael Palin's diaries. He had like 3 diaries of the different decades, and he kind of teases Kevin Kline a lot because I think they got on, but he kind of teases Kevin Kline for being a bit too method. And Michael Palin's like, well, kind of like Laurence Olivier was to Dustin Hoffman in Marathon Man. He's like, why don't you just try acting? You don't have to run around shooting a gun and believe what you're doing, really.
I know I keep going back to this scene, but Michael Palin literally had 2 French fries up his nose and a pear in his mouth. Like, that is really him struggling to breathe, and that makes me so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Luckily, it doesn't go on for very long, but that's real.
Now I'm thinking about the poor assistant who had to be pear ready for Michael Palin. Like, every time they cut, jumping in to grab the pear.
Yeah. You're on pear duty.
You're not let Michael Palin die on this set in front of a rolling camera.
Yeah, don't let me die with this horrendous poem. Yeah. Well, I honestly can't think of anything else. I
think I'm done. I think I was going to go on a bit more about Jamie Lee Curtis, but I think I've said all that needs to be said.
I could talk more about Jamie Lee Curtis.
Yeah.
No, I will leave that one alone. But yeah, no, thanks so much. We've been talking about doing this for like 2 years, and we finally got.
We really had. When you guys watched True Lies. I hope that comes out before this.
It will.
And I was watching it with Ryan. I said, "Oh, now's a good time to do A Fish Called Wanda," because that one has Jamie Lee Curtis in it. So nice segue.
Yeah. Well, no, she was. I mean, she'd kind of. Yeah, around this time, I guess she'd properly transferred from. I guess Trading Places was the first one she did, but she'd kind of become a pretty good comic actress. Whereas everybody thought of her as like a scream queen before in horrors. And I think she's really good. I mean, like you say, I think this and True Lies really shows her in her best possible light. Yeah. And it's kind of interesting now she's gone back to horror.
Well, she was fantastic in Knives Out.
Yeah.
That was actually what got me to go see. I mean, Daniel Craig as Cajun detective didn't hurt, but
Chris Evans in a sweater.
Yeah, but I was like, look at this freaking cast, and kind of capped off with Jamie Lee Curtis as like the matriarch. I was like, yeah, absolutely. So, and of course, it was such a great ensemble, but. Yeah, I'm glad she's back, and it's interesting that she has gone back to go. I mean, she seems more than happy to go back to the Halloween well every 20 years or so. So
yeah. I mean, it's cool that she's still going because I feel like she's like almost like the female equivalent of Kurt Russell. Well, I'm always really happy to see her turn up and stuff. And like you say, I need to watch Knives Out. I forgot about that actually until you said it.
Oh, it's really good.
It's a treat.
But yeah, she. It's funny because in Hollywood, I don't know. I know that there's got to be another actress who kind of has the same. She got into Hollywood with like kind of her pedigree, but it paid off obviously. But the same kind of, you can take her seriously in kind of anything that she gets dropped into, whether it's horror, whether it's comedy, whether it's whatever. And I think, but she's still always kind of Jamie Lee Curtis. She's not doing a character bit. But
my card, if I'm going to slap down a card, I'd say I put down Elizabeth Shue myself for that, where she can do like serious stuff, but she can also be like light, and she can do, horror or comedy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
probably not quite as pedigree as Jamie Lee Curtis.
Well, I mean, you don't need the pedigree. I mean, but it's interesting to see people who get to play across those things and but aren't. You don't see Meryl Streep also doing yogurt commercials, right?
Yeah.
And, people feel just like really, it's Jamie Lee Curtis when she pops up in something.
You don't know. She could be really passionate about yogurt.
As much money as she made off the yogurt company, I'm sure she
paid them to be in that commercial.
Actually, I remember that was when I went, I'm getting old, when she did that commercial. Because she's like going, if you're getting a bit older, this has enzymes in it. And I'm like, oh my God, this like Terrence Stamp turned up. So I remember years ago when I was at college, I think at the start of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, Terrence Stamp had this advert for his potato chips. And they were like, vegan and vegetarian. He was like, if you've got a tender tum like me. And I'm like, God, I'm getting old when Terrence Stamp is doing
You're General Zod. General Zod does not have a tender tum.
For the older gentleman. Potato chips for the older gentleman.
Oh man! All right, well, thank you so much. I think Tender Tum of General Zod is probably the best place we could stop. But we'll be back. We're not going to do Fierce Creatures. I'll say that now.
Let's not do that. Let's not spoil it.
Yeah, one of my favorite movies. I absolutely love it. Asshole.
That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed this podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. You can drop comments on this podcast and let us know what you think. We do have a Signal Watch Patreon, and if you're so moved, we'd most certainly appreciate your support. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies. You've got to be kind.